Welcome, Exiles! So I've been grinding a lot these past few weeks, min-maxing my instack and Kinetic Fusillade build, and I think I've finally achieved its final form. If you've seen my previous week 2 video of the build, you know that this build was already more than capable of easily taking on all kinds of content in the game, but I wasn't quite satisfied with its AoE clear speed, and I wanted to fix that problem. The way I did that was just slapping on Awakened Fork with Return Proj and Sacred Wisps, and lo and behold, it's now a disco ball. The idea behind it is that we're casting a tornado automatically through Spellslinger, and when the Kinetic Fusillade projectiles hit the tornado, which is almost instant, the fork gets consumed and they go all over the place, while still keeping their chain against monsters, and then they return back to us to deal even more damage. Usually people use Pierce with Tornado in order to gain double damage because the projectiles hit the tornado and explode, and then they hit the boss and explode again. But even without the Pierce tech, it still has crazy good single target DPS, while also getting hilariously good AoE coverage. The build also has enough tankiness to just sit and face tank the Juice Blight bosses strat for the most part. You could also do this tech with a Nimbus ring instead of Fork and Return Proj for even more damage, but when I tried it, I was running into duration problems, and I didn't think it was worth it sacrificing a whole bunch of attack speed, since in the end the damage felt kind of the same. But feel free to test and try it out. Now, I will put the character POV in the video's description, but before I go into the setup, I want to quickly mention that this is a fully min-maxed multi-mirror build. You don't need all this crazy gear that I have to get this tech up and running, because Kinetic Fusillade is just that much overtuned. This skill is completely nuts, and I wouldn't be surprised if it gets a heavy nerf next league, even though it's not that popular compared to other skills. With that being said, I'll start off by showing the gear. The most important items to get for this build to even function are still of course a Dusk Ring on our left ring slot and a Time Clasp Ring with 20% reduced skill effect duration on our right ring slot. On the Dusk Ring, we'll want to get a Crusader influence because we'll be using a Bound by Destiny jewel, and for the rest of the stats, just get as much damage and int from it as possible. Personally, I just spammed a bunch of crit multi Scorn essences until I got spell damage and int. The reason these rings are mandatory in the first place though is because we need to lower Kinetic Fusillade's projectile hover duration to be lower than our attacks per second, in order for it to shoot instantly without skipping any projectiles when we press the button. If you're worried whether you have enough duration or too much attack speed, there is a calculator that fellow content creators Locoho and Nemrod made, which I'm sure you've already seen, but I will link their calculator in the video's description just in case, because it's an amazing tool that you should be using when playing this build. Basically, the way it works is you go to your character's POB, you click the calc section, select Kinetic Fusillade in the socket group, and check your duration mod. For example, mine right now is 0.12. Then you go to the calculator spreadsheet, click File, select Make a Copy, and then input your number of projectiles and your duration mod. In my case, I put 8 projectiles and 0.12 duration, and it will calculate how much each projectile hover duration is and how much my maximum attacks per second can be. You should always strive to have as much attack rate as possible, but never above the APS that the calculator shows, so you don't lose out on damage. Next up, the shield. We want to grab as much percent increased chance to block, percent chance to block spell damage, and int as we possibly can. We will be maxing out our attack and spell block in this build version because block is just hilariously OP for defenses. If you've been following the build from my previous videos and you already have the 2 rings and a good shield, then the next item you should get is of course a Mage Blood. While the build does not require a Mage Blood to function, it heavily benefits from having it because it allows us to sacrifice almost all the resistances we would have to get on the other pieces of items, and instead allows us to get them through our flasks. This means that we can focus on pure damage and ES on almost every single other piece of gear. But obviously, if you don't have a Mage Blood, just grab a Synthesis belt with % int implicit and a flat int suffix, and get resists on your other pieces of gear. For our flasks, we want to have a Rumi's Concoction, a Silver Flask, a Quicksilver Flask, a Bismuth Flask, and a Jade Flask. For the their additional effects, we want chance to avoid being stunned, additional elemental resistances, increased crit chance, and reduced effect of curses. The reason we want to have a Rumi's Concoction instead of a Dying Sun or a Bottled Faith is because we already have way too much damage, so why not just cap our block with it while we map so we pretty much never die. We're missing just a little bit to reach 75% attack and spell block, and this flask will provide us with that. If you don't have a Mage Blood, you can use these alternative utility flasks instead. The next items on the list are the Storming Ashcraft and the Jolting Ashcraft. The reason we want these is simple. Jolting Ashcraft provides us with a buff when we crit that gives us a truckload of damage, crit chance, and crit multi. And Storming Ashcraft provides us with lucky damage and flat added lightning damage when we press the button and stand on top of the shocked ground. I've got % increased spell damage prefix on them, but you can also get % int or % lightning pen. All of these prefixes are good, so just use whichever ones you can afford. Next up, we want to grab a Simplex Amulet with Tranquility Anoint as well as % int, % attributes, and preferably % lightning pen. There are other useful prefixes that you could get on a Simplex Amulet of course, but just make sure they have int and attributes since we are an int stacking build after all. If you cannot afford a Simplex Amulet, you can use a regular amulet instead. Just make sure it has a Crusader influence and that it gives int. On the helmet, we want to grab int, mana reservation efficiency, and ES, as well as increased damage per power charge and % fizz damage from hits taken as kills damage Eldritch Implicits. For our body armor, we want int, ES, and % increased attributes benchcraft, as well as 1% less damage taken per int and increased effect of non-curse auras Eldritch Implicits. On the gloves, we want int, 1 abyssal socket, ES, and preferably an open suffix, so we can benchcraft % increased damage during any flask effect. The Eldritch Implicit mods we want here are gain 1 rage on attack hit and inflict lightning exposure on hit. For our boots, we want int, 1 abyssal socket, ES, move speed, and 100% chance to avoid being chilled, with gain % fizz as extra lightning damage and 4% action speed Eldritch mods. The Eldritch mods aren't that important on the boots, but what is important is that we get the 100% chance to avoid being chilled, since we will not be using a Storm Shroud jewel on this build. And finally, the wand. Now, I know what you guys might be thinking. Callie, this is a mere wand. There's no way I can afford this. But fear not. The reason I left it for last is because you don't actually need a mere tier wand for this build to work. And I myself actually got this item last after I got every single other item, and the build was doing just fine even with my previous wand, because the only stats that are important on it are % spell damage per int and flat added lightning damage per int mods, and these generally go for about 20 divines. I self-crafted mine, and it only took me like 10 divines, mostly because Awakener orbs are 5 div each. The catalyst qualities we'll be using on our jewelry are of course attributes on the 2 rings and amulet. If you have a Mage Blood, then put resist catalysts on it, otherwise use attributes here as well. For a Pantheon, we'll want Soul of Aberrath and Soul of Lunaris. If you don't have a Mage Blood or the flasks or chill avoidance on the boots, grab Soul of the Brine King instead. And lastly, the Bandits, go with Aramir for the additional passive point. Next up, the tree. On the tree, we'll be grabbing as many jewel sockets and int as possible, while also getting some other useful passives along the way. Now, there are a few noteworthy passives that I want to talk about. First off, Soul Thief and its mastery. This passive will provide us with 2% ES on kill, which is absolutely massive for sustain. And since we're an int-stacking build, we can grab % increased evasion rating per 5 int mastery, since that will give us a boatload of extra free evasion if we use a Jade Flask, which is very nice to have as a defense. The second passive is Clever Thief, and it's 5% instant leech mastery. We already have boatloads of ES sustain, but the reason we're getting this is because we're spending way too much mana, and getting instant mana leech allows us to basically always be able to spam Kinetic Fusillade, even in maps with no regen mods. And the third important passive is Hasty Demise, for an additional 10% reduced skill effect duration. As for the jewels, we're using 2 maxed out replica reckless defenses. With these jewels and the Rumi's Concoction Flask, we'll be able to cap out our attack and spell block chance while mapping. Watcher's Eye with gain ES on hit while affected by Discipline, and crit multi while affected by Precision. You can skip the crit multi with precision mod and instead get one with percent spell block while affected by discipline if your shield doesn't provide enough spell block. We'll also be using an impossible escape jewel with Mage Bane in order to grab Window of Opportunity and the 2 small passives near it for some additional skill effect duration reduction. If you don't have an impossible escape with Mage Bane yet, just anoint Window of Opportunity on your amulet instead of Tranquility, but you should definitely try and save up for this jewel because Tranquility gives us a boatload of spell damage. We're using a Bound by Destiny jewel with percent increased intelligence if 2 Crusader items are equipped, Emperor's Wit and Emperor's Mastery for some additional percent int and percent attributes, 2 split personalities with int and ES which will be socketing way over here. We have 2 Abyss jewels, one in our gloves and one in our boots. We want as much damage, crit multi or intelligence as we can possibly get on them, and we want corrupted blood immunity on one of them. For our large cluster jewels, we want spell damage, int, attributes, ES, and percent increased effect. They don't necessarily need to be 12 passives, but that's probably the most common int stacking ones you'll find on the trade side. If you're missing some reservation or spell block, feel free to take off the extra 6 points off of the large cluster jewels and allocate them elsewhere. If you cannot afford some of the unique jewels, just use searching abyss jewels like the ones on the gloves and the boots and slot them pretty much everywhere until you can afford to get the unique ones. Abyss jewels are generally very cheap to craft. Around 1 div worth of harvest juice should be good enough for each abyss jewel. Since we're still an elementalist, we'll be grabbing Leash of the Primordial because golems are OP, Mastermind of Discord to buff the lightning exposure that we're applying through the Eldritch implicit on the gloves, Bastion of Elements because it will provide us with immunity to elemental reflect while also giving us a nice small barrier against elemental damage, and lastly Shaper of Flames because it got fixed and physical damage is the main thing that could ever kill us, so converting some of the fizz damage we would take into fire damage is pretty damn good. You could also use Shaper of Winter instead. I'm not exactly sure which one of the two provides us with more defenses, but either way, both Shaper of Flames and Shaper of Winter are very good, so I'll leave this choice up to you. Now it's time for the gems. On Kinetic Fusillade, we'll be using Sacred Wisps, Awakened Fork, Awakened Greater Multiple Projectiles, Returning Projectiles, and less duration support. If you don't care about having insane clear speed and you just want crazy boss damage, just swap Return Proj with Volatility, Sacred Wisps with increased critical damage, Fork with Awakened Elemental Damage with attack skills, and get +1 Pierce from the tree over here. On the helmet, we'll want a level 4 Enlighten linked with Discipline, Tempest Shield, and Arctic Armor. We'll also want to grab a second level 4 Enlighten linked with Flesh and Stone and a level 20 Precision. If you feel like you just want more damage and you don't really care about defenses, just swap out Flesh and Stone and Arctic Armor for Wrath. Also, if you do end up using Wrath instead, make sure to grab Soul of the Brine King instead of Soul of Lunaris, otherwise you'll get frozen all the time during maps. For our travel skill, we still have a level 1 Lightning Warp linked with faster casting as well as Ice Golem in the shield. We have Assassin's Mark with Mark on hit and Stone Golem on the boots. The reason we're using Assassin's Mark instead of Sniper's Mark is because we don't have any other way of generating power charges against bosses, and they do contribute quite a lot to our overall DPS. And finally, we'll also want Spellslinger linked with Tornado on the gloves. Make sure that the Flame Golem is not linked to Spellslinger because that would make us unable to actually use it. That about covers everything there is to know about this build. I've been having an absolute blast destroying everything in the game with it over the last week, and I hope you guys will enjoy it as much as I did. If you guys have any questions or recommendations, drop them down in the comments below and I'll reply back to you as soon as I can. If you liked the video and you wish to see my future Path of Exile content, make sure to like and subscribe. I will also be uploading videos in the upcoming days of various farming strats I did this league in order to actually acquire all the currency to fund this build in the first place. That's about it, so I'll be seeing you all in the next video, and as always, stay sane, Exiles.